While the majority of Republican senators are now saying they'd like to hear from both sides in this case, the fact that the outcome of the hearing could affect November outcomes is certainly not far from many minds, chief among them, the president.
This is a terrible thing that took place, and it's frankly a terrible thing that this information wasn't given to us a long time ago, months ago, when they got it. They could have done that instead of waiting till everything was finished and then all of a sudden spring it. But that's what the Democrats do. That's what they do. It's obstruction. It's resist. It's whatever you have to do.
Is there ever a time when it's not an us versus them? Joining me to discuss are Jennifer Nassour, former chair of the Mass GOP, now the COO of ReflectUS. It's a bipartisan, female-focused political organization aiming to shift the electoral culture. Good to see you, Jennifer. Former state attorney general, former Democratic candidate for governor, Scott Harshbarger, now senior counsel at Kasner and Edwards. Good to see you, Scott. And former third-party candidate for governor, Evan Falchuk. Both Falchuk and Harshbarger are also heading up an initiative called FlipCongress, aimed at changing the current makeup of the House and Senate. We'll talk about that in a minute. Evan, it's good to see you. You know, the last question I asked Jill Abramson as she's leaving was essentially, should the sins of a 17-year-old, even if he admitted that he did something inappropriate, be visited on a 53-year-old? The second after I asked that and she left, we were made aware of a tape that MSNBC has gotten. It's from a 2015 speech that Judge Kavanaugh gave at Columbus School of Law. Listen to it.
Fortunately, we had a good saying that we've held firm to this day, as the dean was reminding me before the talk, which is what happens at Georgetown Prep stays at Georgetown Prep.
Kavanaugh obviously had a smile on his face when he said that, but you don't have a smile on your face. What's the impact of that on this whole process?
Well, I mean, if nothing had come up, you would just say, oh, that's one of those things that everyone says, right? You say it in a green room, you say it when you're in a car. But I think because this information is on the table, that doesn't appear to be really well received, I would say. This is the first time I'm seeing it.
Me too.
And it seems like, but I mean, I would want to hear all the information from both sides and really have a hearing on this.
What's your reaction to that? Obviously, you meant it as a joke at the time, but obviously, as Jennifer said, it takes on different meaning in this context.
Well, it reinforces a reality that's developing about this background and his conduct. And I think that in any other environment other than a president who's shameless and will not pull back regardless, this should be a gentle way in which he, in his own behalf, steps aside and lets another conservative jurist who would meet the qualifications become the Supreme Court justice.
Is this a nail in?
It's one of many. And there's a lot of reasons to oppose Kavanaugh just on the grounds of his political views, which are too extreme, I think, for most Americans. But this story is something that in a normal environment would have ended his candidacy for the Supreme Court. You know,
I want to step back for a second. The Republicans are already getting crushed in these generic midterm elections with women. How does pushing ahead, forget this for a second, that video, how does pushing ahead with the Kavanaugh nomination, particularly if he's confirmed, how does that not make that divide even greater come November, Jennifer?
Well, I mean, you know, I think if we look back to 1991, that's exactly what happened, right, when Anita Hill came out. And so, I mean, we saw in 1992 a swell of women that were elected to office. But here's the thing. No matter how many women are elected to office, there's still not enough women compared to men. You've got 19.6% of women elected to U.S. Congress. And so if you're looking at those numbers, all the women running today, unfortunately, they decided that they were going to run, but they weren't running in the areas that they should be running. So I don't know if it actually has an impact. It will drag more people to the polls. That definitely will happen. And so I think that the Republican Party needs to get themselves together and figure out what the message is going from here.
You know, speaking of women, we did a little math this afternoon. There are 256 women who were in finals for the Senate or Congress. 179 of them are Democrats, 59 are Republicans. Common sense would suggest to me the Democrats do get a big boost, particularly amongst women candidates, over this whole Kavanaugh thing. Again, particularly if he's confirmed by Republican votes, no?
Yeah, I agree. I think it reinforces a narrative that has been developing in the various campaigns. And the reason to oppose this, bullying, shameless president of the United States who has Republican cheerleaders and enablers. And I say that generally because coming up to this, it's not going to be just Kavanaugh that's going to do this. It's a whole series of steps that seem to me to to make it clear that the only way to check and balance here is to elect Democrats to Congress. It may well help. The one thing it may well help is in the Senate for Democrats. That is, senators now have to vote. It's not Congress. It's not House of Representatives people. It's senators that will be asking questions and commenting. They may have the difficulty.
Do you buy my theory that if they win in the short run by getting 50 votes plus Mike Pence potentially for Kavanaugh, that they lose more votes, the Republicans, come November?
They do, and part of the problem we have is that there are a lot of well-meaning Republicans who have their head on right. Just it seems that at the level of the National Party, that's not who's in charge. So it is an exercise of raw power right now without a belief in standards and norms and decency.
Can I ask you two on the ends something I think Scott was going to in the beginning here? I don't even understand why the president's people have not said to Kavanaugh, pull out. Say the president wanted you to stay in, but because of your family, even though you did nothing wrong, I'm going to get out and let him pick somebody else to who has a cleaner history, for lack of a better expression. Does that surprise you?
No.
Why?
Because this is a common theme that I've said before. The president has not been a Republican in his previous life. He just suddenly picked up on Republican ideals and values. But
he likes winning, and he may lose this thing.
And he likes winning, and he likes saying, well, I don't necessarily agree that he's going to lose this thing.
I don't know if he's going to lose it either.
I think it might get pushed through. I think the loss ends up being to the Republican Party, not to the president.
Which you don't think he cares that much about.
Exactly.
How about you?
I think that in the Bob Woodward book, they talked about when there are allegations made against you, you should never admit that you did anything wrong.
Deny.
And that's what we're seeing with his behavior.
That's the Roy Cohn thing that he learned from Roy Cohn
his
when he
behavior
represented
is
his family.
Consistent.
You know, can we? I mentioned your involvement in ReflectUS. Briefly, you started telling us a minute ago. What's the agenda? What are you trying to do?
So, again, the numbers are really astounding. So women make up more than 51% of all Americans. However, our representation in legislatures around the country is about 26%. And in Congress, it's 19.6%. And so clearly, if you look at the Constitution, we as women are very, very underrepresented.
So what are you trying to do?
So our mission is to make sure that women on both sides of the aisle, we're bipartisan, both sides of the aisle are elected to office. And the reason being is that if you only have Democratic women elected to office, who are they negotiating with? The old white Republican males? Or are you going to put more Republican women in there for them to talk to?
So she's doing a bipartisan thing. You guys, this FlipCongress deal is not a bipartisan thing. It's a partisan thing.
I want to be real clear. I say this, the Democratic Party has major flaws. But right now, if we are going to have check and balance on a president who, in my view, has become the law of the ruler, not the rule of law, and is a shameless, bullying, deranged individual, and I say that quite
you say that
eloquently,
yes.
is Democrats are the only way that we can change. But you have to be practical. It can't be lefties. It can't be ideological. It has to be a practical thing. And that's what our FlipCongress is about. And diversity is a wonderful thing, but not here. Right now, there are many Democratic women who really have a viable chance. We in blue states have a chance to have an impact.
Could you explain so quickly in 45 seconds, how are you identifying and who are you identifying based on what criteria?
So at flipcongress.org, what we've done is aggregate information from Real Clear Politics and the Cook Political Report to identify the races most likely to flip a seat from red to blue.
And say what? Those are the places where you should send your money and put your energy?
And we have the links to each of the donation pages. We just expanded it to 50 races that are in range of being flipped in the House and 4 in the Senate. And then there's also a link to go to the last weekend, which is a chance to make phone calls and otherwise support.
FlipCongress.org?
FlipCongress.org.
And what's your deal?
Ours is reflectus.org.
Great. Nice to see you, Jennifer.
See you.
Scott?
Thank you, sir.
Evan, good to see
Thanks,
you.
Jim.
Thanks so much for your time, all three.